My name is Marcia Brown, and I am the Vice Chancellor for Student and Community Affairs at Rutgers Newark.
How did you begin your career at Rutgers? What was your background here?
Well, got connected with this university through my experience as a law student. And it's interesting because I didn't have a seamless law school experience. I started in the mid 70s, one of the first classes of black and Latino students to come to the university in 1975. And then I dropped out after a year. I was married and was raising a child, and didn't come back until 16 years later. So I started again in 1990 and finished my degree, and then came back to work here in the law school as an assistant dean. And from that, segued into some other some other positions on the campus, and left for a little while, then came back. Was asked to come back by the provost at the time, Norman Samuels. And then when the current chancellor got the position, he asked me to join him. So it's a unique kind of journey that I embarked on, because as a lawyer, although I did practice, clerk for the Chief Justice of the New Jersey Supreme Court, the trajectory for me would have been to just be in practice somewhere with the law firm or in my own practice, since I was not a traditional student. I mean, I was older when I finally got my degree. But, there was something about higher ed that really attracted me. The idea of being in an environment where one could conceivably anyway, and theoretically, struggle with the best ideas to develop a sense of what it means to be a human being. And what is it that we're living in right now in these times, what some people call postmodern times, but what is it that these times mean? Are there any particular truths that, we can parse out for a new generation that's coming in to the university to try to understand how do we distill our own histories? And I thought this was probably the best place for somebody like me who's interested in history, in the intersection between law, race, class, and broader notions of social justice to be involved with. And I could do that and still do my job as an attorney and as an administrator. So this was the best place for me to be.
That's great. You mentioned some key terms, looking at race, issues of class, social justice, poverty. Could you talk a little bit about the town and gown relationship of Rutgers with the Newark community? Any kind of background on the campus from the 50s, 60s?
Well, my experience with Newark really started in the mid to late 70s, but I would argue that in many ways the development of Newark, or the underdevelopment as some people might call it, is similar to what we find in other cities. I'm from Detroit, but there's also Chicago, there's Atlanta, there's Baltimore, there's DC. And those cities between the 50s and the 60s were probably experiencing a sort of political, what might seem to be a political, social, or economic, I don't want to say revival, but there were very positive things happening between the 50s and the 60s, seemingly, because blacks were coming from the South, coming up north. Excuse me, they were getting jobs. And the black community was, in some ways, a thriving community. Just for a very short period then, because in the 60s, we started to see capital leaving these areas, going either south or south in a global sense to the third world. And the people most affected by that were people of color. And in the cities, we have a growing population of black and Latino, primarily Puerto Rican, in terms of demographics and ethnicity. And Newark, I think, was probably very much characterized that. 1960s were defining years, particularly 1967, 68, and 69. 67, of course, you have the chaos of rebellion. And the rebellion is reflective of the contradictions in race and class in these communities, that, you know, racism was preventing a whole nation of people from having access to those things that would enable them to live decent lives. That racism was in many ways causing them to live dehumanized lives. So we have this growth of a poverty industry. The people living in poverty, people working in that industry that's sort of purveyors of poverty. And Newark is right in the intersection of this. It's poor, it's black, it's small, you know. It's right next to New York City, and what does that do to its, you know, sense of identity? It's got 4 major universities in it, but these universities are predominantly white. And at that time, if you were to see those universities, the design of the campuses was such that the statement was, you know, stay out. This is an in-house community. Those who come here have a ticket to get in. You don't have a ticket to get in. So figuratively and literally, people actually walked around the walls, literal and invisible, of these campuses, not feeling like they had a connection. So in 1967, when Newark erupts, along with Detroit and Watts, the university was not, you know, was very much factored into that. And there was a lot of criticism. And so, and in '68, with King's death, there was more of a effort to ask the university, or to demand that the university look at fundamental contradictions in Newark between.
I'm sorry, before we start looking at those contradictions, would you mind just giving me 1 second?
Yeah.
I'm going to bring the light around here. There's
Okay.
a little bit of a shadow behind you, and it looks fine. And we
Okay.
don't have to re-answer any of those questions. I
Okay.
just want it to look really perfect. Sorry, I just figured, you know,
That's quite all right.
if Dr. Price is going to look at anything I do, I really want it to be on.
Yeah, you want it to be good.
And thank you again for being so patient. I appreciate it. And I'm sure you've had moments like that in your professional practice, where you're looking at a brief and everything's.
Oh,
fine,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
you realize that you want to put in a slightly different word structure
Yeah, that's
or
not a
an extra
problem.
sentence. There we go. It does have a filter on it. It's not too bright for you, right?
Okay, no.
The thing is, if you don't have enough light, then you tend to get shadows and stuff, which is
Mhm.
not flattering on anyone. So I figure, I know I want to look pretty.
I don't think about it, but you know, whatever works is fine.
Thank you so much. So we were just about to discuss some of the contradictions between the university and the community. You mentioned that a wide portion of the university's population, student population, was predominantly white.
Yeah, not only the student population, the whole university, faculty and staff, was predominantly white. I mean, Clement Price had not gotten here yet to sort of open up the floodgates for greater diversity in faculty. But, you know, first off, you have a university which is defined as the great democratic institution. Democracy then is supposed to reflect, you know, those that exist in that society, and they should have access, especially to the commodity we call education, which, in the best of all possible views, suggests that there are people who have access to information that will make them better citizens, citizens more able to function in a democracy. But the contradiction is between this idea then of this democratic institution and who's here and who has access to it. And the people who live in this community do not have access to this university, not as students, not as workers, not as teachers and instructors. So 67, 68, 69, I think, were very difficult years for this university as it grappled with the contradiction between what it purports to be as an institution and what the reality was, how it existed, what it looked like, how people regarded it. I think in any reality, though, in many ways, what shapes the resolution of those contradictions are people. People who step forward, people who serve as drivers. And in this university, there were several people who were positioned within the university at that time to step to the plate and say, let's discuss these issues. And I'm blanking on one of their names, but Malcolm Talbot was one. Very liberal, very much a humanitarian, very deeply affected by the rebellion, by the chaos, by the racism that he felt existed in our society and that he saw reflected in the way that people lived in Newark, who lacked access to those things that would enable them to live better and decent lives. And I think he began to hold a series of discussions about what it is that Rutgers Newark needed to do, and brought in people from the community, people like Junius Williams and others, to talk. And Malcolm Talbot was in the law school. So the law school is really beginning to sort of serve as the major driver for the campus in many ways. And out of that grew a number of programs and policies, but I think it's important to recognize that this begins the first discussion, how difficult it might have been, how deeply affected people were by what the university did and did not do. I can't speak firsthand, but these discussions must have been extraordinarily profound. First time in the history that the university begins to hold a discussion now with people who are community people. What that must have been like, I can only imagine, but this begins a new era in terms of the university feeling an accountability and a sense of responsibility to that community.
That's great. Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could speak. You mentioned during the commemoration process that Rutgers, and I think this is touted anytime I hear anything about the school which I attend, that we have the most diverse campus in the nation. And I know that it's pretty much on every pamphlet and anything that I hear about the school. And I'm wondering, what does that actually mean in real terms? What does that mean for the students that are here, for the faculty members? What does it mean to be the most diverse campus in the nation for something like 11 years running, I believe?
It's actually 13 years
running.
From a tagline, brand, PR perspective, it's great. 13 years we've been the most diverse campus in the nation, and that means that there are more diverse students on the campus of Rutgers Newark than in any other campus in the nation. That's out of more than 3,000 colleges and universities. So that's a wonderful thing. The question is why? And that's a question that doesn't get answered a lot. It's one that I would argue that in many ways that diversity is not intentional. In important ways to acknowledge, it's geographical. It's the fact that Rutgers Newark sits in sort of a valley intersected by 5 different counties that bring these teeming masses of students here because they happen to be corridors of integration. So both in a national sense and in an international sense. So we have a lot of international students whose backgrounds are from Southeast Asia or from South America. And so they bring that ethnicity and the different colors and the different language and the languages and the different cultures here to our campus. But again, New Jersey is a state is a state with major corridors of immigration. And so this is a public university. It's a reasonably priced university in terms of tuition. And so those students have come here. Now, having said that, the institution does embrace diversity. Its admissions policies, its outreach activities are designed to work with populations of color that are in the community. So in that sense, that's intentional. But I guess when we think about the campus being the most diverse, as we interrogate those notions, we want to know what does it mean and what is its value? And I think that those discussions are ongoing now. And what the university has done intentionally is to take those scholars within the community who have an interest, people like Professor Price, Sherry Butterfield, Mark Winston, all scholars of various aspects of diversity and community development, and ask them to dig deeper and begin to talk about and create a discourse about that diversity. Let's break it apart. Let's define it more clearly. Let's look at its history. Let's look at what its meaning for this campus is and where do we need to go with it. So those things are ongoing now, and I think it's important to acknowledge that the university, and particularly the Office of the Chancellor, is very committed to that that exploration. But in a real sense, in terms of what you're saying, what you asked, it's about difference. It's about a campus that offers difference. Difference in ethnicity, difference in culture, difference in language, difference in religion, difference. And how do we come to know difference? How do we come to embrace difference? I don't think we have the answers to that, but I think the answers to that can be found here, because you do have this kind of diversity. It's profound, but I don't think we really understand it as much as we need to. And by that I mean, we want to understand it from an educational point of view. In other words, how do we use it in the classrooms to grow our students into different kinds of thinkers for the 21st century? In fact, what kind of thinkers do they need to be for the 21st century, and how does diversity add to that? As you can see, I'm asking questions upon questions because that's what it's really about. I'm not interested in the answers so much as I am in the questions, because I think they'll direct us to places where we need to go. But it's just all these questions that are churning when you bring up these notions of diversity. I think we're well positioned to begin that exploration. We have the right people, we have the right institutional commitment, and we're in a location where I think out of this can come a tremendous repository of knowledge about it.
I'm curious what role Liberation Hall do you think played? We just had the 40th commemoration of the event. We know that it was a peaceful protest. Thank goodness the National Guard wasn't. It could have been tragic, and it
Yes,
wasn't.
it could have.
And I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about Liberation Hall for those that might have never heard of the event, don't know anything about it. Some students could come to the school and graduate from it and not know anything about it. And I was wondering if you could give a little bit of information about that and how maybe it had some effects on the diversity that we get to enjoy today.
Well, historically, on February 24th, 1969, 20 students took over Conklin Hall and barricaded themselves in and demanded that the university, I like to call it desegregate, but that's not a popular term these days, so diversify the campus and have more open admissions and bring students of color, bring faculty of color, use resources to bring the university into the community to help solve some of the social problems that were existing there. So these students were brave new leaders who, in a period of great turbulence, because remember 1968 had happened, 1967 there were these, the National Guard, as you said, did come in, people were killed. And when these students barricaded themselves in and made these demands, there were people who wanted to storm the building. But cooler heads prevailed. The university itself, I think, was a major factor in the absence of an assault on that building, because the university wanted to work through these issues with the students. Had they had a different attitude, had they had, for example, the attitude that the complexion of the campus actually represented, that we're we're only interested in maintaining the homogeneity of this campus, and we're really not interested in the concerns and the social justice issues that these students are raising. Perhaps they would have allowed the police to, storm this building, but the leaders of the university who were there at the time were people who were willing to take a critical look at themselves and at this institution, and therefore say, let's have a conversation about it. So of the 72-hour siege that the students were in this building, these conversations were happening. People were negotiating. I mean, you could imagine that this must have been filled with drama. If you think about, 20 students in a building wondering if they were going to live or die, wanting to do something for the people and for posterity and for the country that they thought was right to do, but still not knowing whether they would make it through this. And if they did, would they really leave this posterity in terms of the perspective behind this perspective on growing a new, more diverse campus. But they did, they prevailed. And out of that came a whole set of, I think, perspectives that Rutgers Newark became associated with that were important from a social justice point of view. So, Cochran Hall then was renamed Liberation Hall in honor of this 72-hour takeover of the building and in honor of these young people. In fact, 40 years later, when they had the commemoration, one of the events that took place was something called Inside Conklin Hall, and many of the people who were in that building came back for a discussion about what happened and what they were thinking, and sort of the real story. You were there kind of, perspective, and it was amazing. And to see history come together with the present, these young people now walk past this building every day, see it, and many of them didn't know the history of this building. Now there's a plaque in the building. There's an effort to rename it Liberation Hall. And I think that there's now generating enough knowledge amongst our new generation of young people who are interested in that history and interested in what is the continuation of it. What's the next phase of struggle? What is their role as students now in the 21st century? What is their Conklin Hall? What is their Liberation Hall? What would they spend 72 hours embracing and struggling with or being engaged with? That's the question for them, I think, today. It's not enough just to know that that history happened, because that history happened because of specific conflicts, tensions, and contradictions existing at that time. Whether or not those contradictions exist today is not the question. The question is, do they exist in their same form? Do they exist with the same, perspectives wound up in them? I would argue that those contradictions do still exist, but they exist in a different form. Capitalism is no longer the same capitalism that it was. Racism is no longer the same racism that it is. We don't have segregation in the way that we had segregation. And then in this campus, one could suggest that perhaps this is a way to begin to ask what are the contradictions with respect to social justice, with respect to race, with respect to class, and begin to define them. Compare them to yesterday, begin to define them for today. And what is it that we need to be doing then if we say that we are people who want to be engaged in the building of a new world, if we want to redefine what it means to be a human being and what are the responsibilities of people who are human beings in this society. Now, today, when you have a black president, that would be a very profound discussion for young people to have. I'm not sure that they're having it. And having been a child of the 60s and having defined my existence by those struggles, the struggle against black power, the struggle against imperialism, the struggle for the right of people to live decent lives, to live in safe and decent housing, to go to school and get a good education, to be able to work and be productive people, and to show compassion and kindness and understanding and respect for the sovereignty of others. Those are the things that I grew up, those are the ideas that surrounded my life when I grew up in the 60s. And I'm not sure that, that's the case today. 60s, so grew up at the end of World War II and Pearl Harbor. And in an era where I think I was a generation of the first bomb, and where imperialism, the idea that the United States could go into other people's countries, was not a foreign concept to people. In fact, we were raised to believe that that was the right thing to do. This is America going abroad to create freedom for other people. And when that bubble burst for me as a result of the civil rights movement, which is, is clashing with this whole notion of freedom abroad, but yet you have, people here who are being beaten and stoned and murdered just because they're trying to live, just trying to exist. And I'm in the North, I'm not in the South, but I'm seeing what's happening. I'm seeing this civil rights, the pictures of the whole civil rights movement on camera. And this is having a profound effect on me. And I'm thinking that this is what I've got to be involved in. I'm 16, 17 years old. And at the time that the civil rights movement was sort of hitting its peak, in 1965, 66, 67, there's this parallel effort for Black Power. And I'm right in the middle of this. I'm dealing with the Black Panthers. I'm running with the Black Liberation Front International. And, we are both physically and locationally presenting ourselves to the community as leaders of this generation, wanting to better their lives, wanting to be involved in a struggle against white power, as we perceive that to be the enemy. That's the face of the power of those who were oppressing our people. So I went to college, first in my family to go, and got involved in struggles on the college level. Met white people for the first time in my life who talked progressive politics, or were engaged in radical and sometimes even revolutionary politics, SDS, Marxism, socialist. So that really profoundly shaped my life. And I didn't think that I would be involved in anything other than the struggle to overcome racism, the struggle to overcome what I began to see as the most negative aspects of economy, and that was capitalism. We don't have time to go into that, but so my hope is that this generation can find its own profound sense of engagement with the world as they know it, and that perhaps we can be helpers to them, to talk to them about our own history, but that they begin to find and create their own history for themselves in this time.
Thank you so much. I
So-
just have one last question, because I know you have to get going.
Yeah.
The final one is just, what kind of hopes do you have for Newark? What kind of hopes do you have for the university going into the future? I know you mentioned students finding something to be passionate about, something to maybe think about what's worth sacrificing for, and what to be politically involved for. But more specifically, what would you say are some of the ways that we can meet the demands that have not yet been met, that were asked of the university at the time?
I'm excited about where the university is at now, because I think we have a leadership in Chancellor Diner and a growing number of faculty who are very much engaged with the questions that we've been talking about in terms of race, class, diversity, and how profound they are for transformational learning. and they're bringing their perspectives into the classroom, and I think that they're going to help to create young people who are thinking differently about themselves as students. The Chancellor's commitment to change in Newark means that people like myself and others in this university can take the resources of the university, our professional knowledge, our scholarship, our expertise, into that community and begin to work solidly on problems, social problems and social issues, which we're doing right now. And I think to the extent that we can continue to do this, then we have a university that's taking its rightful place in that community as a neighbor, as a good citizen, as a creator of change. And that's what we need to be about. And finally, my hope for this community is that the people themselves can feel empowered by what we do to take a more definitive and self-determining stand to make their community what they think it ought to be.